Why do your history books skip 600 years of Chinese-African trade? Because the truth destroys their entire colonial narrative about Africa being discovered. The evidence sits in museums across 3 continents, yet somehow never makes it into mainstream education. You're about to become the person in the room who knows what really happened before Europe ever set foot on African soil. In 1405, 67 years before Columbus stumbled into the Caribbean, Admiral Zheng He commanded a Chinese treasure fleet of 280 ships and 28,000 men. Their destination wasn't the Americas. It was Africa. Specifically, the Swahili coast, where they established trade relationships that would span centuries. The Yongle Encyclopedia, completed in 1408, contains detailed maps of the African coastline that European cartographers wouldn't produce until the 1500s. But here's where it gets interesting. The Chinese weren't coming as conquerors. They were coming as partners. The Ming Dynasty's treasure fleets brought porcelain, silk, and silver to exchange for African gold, ivory, and medicinal plants. Archaeological evidence from Malindi, Kenya reveals Chinese coins dating to 1403. That's 70 years before Vasco da Gama allegedly discovered the Indian Ocean route to Africa. The Swahili chronicles, written in Arabic script, document Chinese admirals being received by African kings as equals. No missionary activity. No forced conversions. No territorial claims. The Chinese established diplomatic relations based on mutual benefit, not exploitation. Compare this to what happened when Europeans arrived with Bibles and guns. In Mogadishu, Somalia, Chinese archaeologists have uncovered a 600-year-old Chinese cemetery. The tombstones are written in both Chinese characters and Arabic script, proving long-term Chinese settlement and integration with local communities. These weren't temporary trading posts. These were established communities of Chinese merchants who married local women and raised bilingual children. The most devastating evidence lies in genetics. Recent DNA studies of coastal East African populations reveal significant Chinese ancestry dating to the early 15th century. The markers are specific to the Fujian and Guangdong provinces of China, exactly where Zheng He recruited his sailors. Your ancestors were building international partnerships while Europe was still burning witches. Here's what they really don't want you to know. Chinese medical texts from the 1400s describe African medicinal plants in detail, complete with their Swahili names and preparation methods. This wasn't colonial extraction. This was knowledge exchange. African healers taught Chinese physicians about local remedies, while Chinese doctors shared acupuncture and herbal techniques with African practitioners. The Portuguese chronicles from the 1480s describe arriving in East African ports to find Chinese traders already established with permanent factories and local partnerships. Vasco da Gama's own journals mention Chinese ships in Malindi Harbor in 1498. Yet somehow, your textbooks skip this inconvenient detail. Why the cover-up? Because it destroys the European narrative of African isolation and primitivity. If Chinese fleets were conducting sophisticated trade with organized African kingdoms for centuries before European contact, then Africa was never the dark continent waiting for European enlightenment. Africa was a major player in global trade networks that Europeans eventually muscled their way into. The Zheng He expeditions ended abruptly in 1433 when the Ming Dynasty turned inward, focusing on defending against Mongol invasions. Imagine if they had continued. Imagine if Chinese-African partnerships had another century to develop before European interference. The entire trajectory of African history changes. But perhaps the most powerful evidence sits in the Forbidden City. The imperial palace houses African gifts presented to Chinese emperors, Kenyan gold jewelry, Ethiopian frankincense, and Zimbabwean carved soapstone. These weren't tribute from conquered territories. These were diplomatic gifts between sovereign nations recognizing each other's power. The Chinese kept detailed records of everything. The veritable records of Emperor Yongle document African ambassadors visiting Beijing, being housed in the imperial guest quarters, and participating in court ceremonies as honored guests. Meanwhile, European records from the same period describe Africans as commodities to be traded. This isn't just about historical accuracy. This is about understanding your place in the world. Your ancestors weren't sitting in isolation waiting to be discovered by Europeans. They were active participants in global networks of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The Chinese recognized this. The Arabs recognized this. Only European colonial historians pretended otherwise. Every time someone claims Africa had no history before European contact, remember the treasure fleet of Zhenhe. Remember the Chinese cemetery in Mogadishu. Remember the genetic markers proving 600 years of partnership. You carry the DNA of international diplomacy, not colonial subjugation. The truth was never hidden from Chinese historians or African oral traditions. It was only hidden from you. Now you know what museums whisper and textbooks silence. Follow Ponolens where the libraries they try to burn are rebuilt, one truth at a time.